Welcome to 52 Miniatures. My name is Alex and this video is sponsored by Squarespace. In this video, I'm crafting a house, a ruined house for tabletop miniature wargames, as well as a hill, using some of the simplest techniques I've come across. Hills and houses, all you need to craft some simple yet effective terrain for your tabletop wargames. And so, another epic tale from the hobby realm. I'm working on the second half of this scenic wargaming table. Playlist on my progress linked above. The theme of this table is a coastal line with a drained sea. Long story, but the moon got hit by an asteroid, changing the seas on Earth, revealing the sea floor, a new battleground. Oh, and magic has returned, and it's the First World War. My original plan was to have a wrecked ship on this area of the board. I then accidentally built a lighthouse instead and now need a cliff for the lighthouse because it would look silly with the lighthouse without a cliff. My hill can represent any hill needed for tabletop gaming. Hills are great as atmospheric scenery as well as functional line of sight blockers. They're rather simple crafting ventures and a great place to start when getting into making your own terrain. I'm going to use XPS foam to build up my hill. XPS foam is an insulation material found globally in hardware-type stores, nowadays even stocked by some hobby stores. XPS stands for extruded polystyrene, whatever that means. I'd class XPS foam as one of the most handy materials to have around when building and crafting terrain for tabletop gaming, model railways, or any other model making. It's light, durable, and easy to cut and shape. Most importantly, it also holds the texture you press into it. We'll see more of that later, but for example, you can draw a brick texture on it with a ball pen, and that texture will stick there. Or roll over it with a ball of aluminium foil, and it looks like rugged earth. Now you see a lot of crafters online cut XPS with hot wire cutters. As the foam melts when exposed to heat, using hot wire cutters are a common way to cut the foam. I've got an old hot wire cutter that I borrowed from my dad. It's okay, I guess. There's also these cheap handheld things that you can buy online. Okay for some shaping, but not so much for cutting. But honestly, if making rudimentary shapes like hills, all you need is a snap blade knife. A few cuts through the foam and then it snaps off pretty easily. I've cut out 3 pieces that I layer on top of each other for a good cliff height, shaping them into something that might resemble a cliff. Crafting terrain for tabletop games is fun, if you let it. It's seldom about realism, so you can kind of go for what you want. But it's also about creating a useful obstacle. A fun challenge. Everything needs to be able to be used in-game or it's just kind of a waste of space. Thus, my cliff needs to be climbable by little miniatures on plastic flat bases. And that's how a cliff gets a most unrealistic ramp up the one side. Gluing all the bits together can be done with different adhesives. Just don't use superglue. It will melt the plastic through chemical reactions of unknown sort to me. You can use hot glue from a hot glue gun if it's not super hot, too hot, and it will just melt a hole right through the plastic. I'm using the adhesive put in my hand when I was in a Swedish hardware store, asking a knowledgeable fellow what to use when wanting to adhere 2 sheets of XPS foam together. I just sure hope he worked there. I've seen others use expanding foam as glue, with a lot of weight put on the bits getting glued together. And I've seen others use regular wood glue or carpenter's glue. Whatever you think works for you. I'd, however, always recommend using some toothpicks as reinforcement. When all set, it's time to shape this lump of foam into something more rocky looking. Not Balboa, well maybe after a fight. For this, I'll be cutting the foam into ragged shapes with a snap blade knife, then using a suitable stone. I press the stone into the foam like a stamp. The result is awesome. It looks like rock. As I said earlier, this is the XPS superpower. The fact that you can stamp shapes into the foam and they stay there. This in itself can be enough to shape your cliff. But I like adding one more thing for a little more authenticity. and that is rock molds. These in particular are cast from woodland scenic molds. I think they are a great investment as you can keep using them over and over again to make rocks whenever you need them. I use plaster with a bit of black paint mixed in when I make my rocks. Only so that if my gaming pieces get chipped or paint gets rubbed off, then at least there will be a dark grey surface underneath and not a stark white surface. I glue these to the hill using hot glue. The reason for rock molds is not only the added level of detail, it's like when shaping something like XPS with a knife, there are restrictions to how you can shape things. Adding some rock molds adds another realistic shape dimension, not simply made with a knife. And that to me totally sells the idea that this is a very suitable cliff for my gaming table. I did a lot of this work during a live stream. You're very welcome to join in on the 52 Miniatures live streams here on YouTube. The schedule is as random as the conversations, but I'd love to see you if you can make it. The hill is now in essence done. There is some final work on hiding some of the joins between the sheet and in the rock molds, but we'll get to that in a bit. Yet here is a sneak peek review of the sum of these simple techniques. Now, before we move on from hills to houses, I just wanted to share one of my favorite shapes of hill.
Down here. Yeah, have you ever heard about Squarespace?
Yeah, sure, the sponsor of this video, but I was just...
Exactly. Let me tell you some more.
Yeah, okay.
Squarespace is an all-in-one platform for creating websites, an intuitive platform that I've been using for some time. Lucky for me, there's no need for expertise. You can choose between carefully curated layouts or start a completely personalized website with the new guided design system, Squarespace Blueprint. A tailored website to suit your needs up in no time, optimized for all devices and with optimized SOE tools so you show up more often to more people. For me, Squarespace has been a great tool, starting with a nice template that I can adjust for my specific needs. I've created a website with introductions to my work, with galleries of my miniatures and such. It also hosts my online store. Customizing the shop with print-on-demand t-shirts as well as my own artworks and downloads has worked out well, and with a back end that makes my side of things simple when dealing with deliveries and fulfillment. The checkout and payment options for customers works seamlessly, accepting credit cards, PayPal and Apple Pay, but also pay later options like Afterpay and ClearPay. If you're looking for somewhere to display your art, sell merch, if you have a painting service or sell STLs, start up a website for your own game store or club, check out Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/52miniatures to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Okay, thank you, Alex, and thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring this video. Now back to the hill. This is one of my favorite shapes of hill. Obviously the one that I made for my table, it's a bit more like a tower, which suits my layout. But on a tabletop, a hill like this is really efficient, where you've got a slope on one side that your miniatures can sort of walk up and stand on the edge here, and the other miniatures can pass down below. And from the front, you have a hill, and from the back, it's more a bit of a curve that you could, use grass tufts or whatever on there, or just keep it as a hill. This is just something I made. It took me about 5 minutes. Should probably be a little bit larger, but there we are. My favorite shape of hill.
It's now time to look at crafting a house. Well, my house is going to be a ruined house. It suits my theme better. But everything we create in ruined form might as well be used for buildings of the non-war-torn persuasion, and can be built as standalone structures, not part of a board like mine. My building here has a purpose. I need an access point to the lighthouse. As rational thoughts seldom enter my mind, the sentence, "Would it not be cool with a ruined building like an old prison or correction facility or asylum that connects the lighthouse to the mainland?" made perfect sense.
To fit the theme of my build, this would obviously be a building right at the shoreline. A basement would not make architectural sense, perhaps a little bit damp, but it definitely makes imaginary sense. Openings underwater where seawater would be led into a basement, correction and rehabilitation chamber. Very weird World War I. Wonderful. And what I just did is the best first step of building a house. Coming up with what kind of a house it is. A barn will be shaped differently than a church. Get the story first, maybe some reference images that fit the story, and the rest becomes more clear. I improvised a basement layer of XPS foam and then started on the building itself. And it's now time to introduce the next miracle material, all you will ever need to build simple, straightforward tabletop structures. Foam core. A thin sheet of foam with rather thick paper sheets glued on either side, creating a strong yet easy to cut sheet. Sheets that will become walls that make up our structure. After a quick chat with my friend Leif over YouTube channel Devs and Dice, Mordheim Building Connoisseur, be sure to check out his channel, I settled for 2 or 3 inches per floor level. Using inches when constructing buildings is for some games smart, as it makes measuring movement a bit simpler. If you're building several buildings for a small town or settlement, using reoccurring measurements between floors, for example, will create great unity. And the next step is the least crafty bit, and for many, the most unavailable in a home hobby environment bit. But fear not, there are many options. I 3D printed windows and doorposts. The files I found is a free download. I've linked the source down in the description. Please give the sculptor a tip if you can. If you don't have a 3D printer, there are plenty of ways to buy windows, both 3D printed or MDF versions online. You can definitely check for dollhouse versions. But you can also craft your own. A recent example of mine is the lighthouse I've built. The little door and structure around it is completely built out of ice cream sticks and matches. Once I have my basic layout done, you can see how this very rapidly can be turned into a house. A bottom floor of cells with smaller windows and a first floor of something a bit more grand. A nice view for the rehabilitation team on tea break. As I'm doing a ruin, it's now time for me to cut it into a more ruined shape. I like doing the full layout first, to then ruin it. That's just how my head works. A slight waste of materials, but a lot of the cut-offs can be used later on. I spend some time with the ruined edges, cutting them into what will pass for broken walls, and then a lovely foam core trick. The paper is not very difficult to remove from the foam core underneath. So I can cut the paper in segments and pull the paper away to reveal the foam. In my case, the paper will represent a plastered wall surface, in places ruined to reveal the stone or brick underneath. With a ballpoint pen, I can etch the foam, creating a brick pattern. This could, of course, be done on the entirety of the wall, removing all the paper and etching in brick texture on the entire wall. Another option on bigger surfaces is to use a texture roller. The ones I have are intended for use on clays or putties, but suffice for foam to a degree. My first floor is given a sort of stone cobble texture, something that probably scrubs nice and clean after possible interrogation mishaps. Or spilt tea. Not until I have 2 walls and a first floor do I glue things together, as the 3 pieces help each other stay nice and straight. I use my hot glue gun to put this together. I then add a few more sections to the building. Nothing here that necessarily makes sense, but gives the general idea of something large. I leave the back pretty much open for gameplay purposes. And now it's time to texture the walls. I'm going to use white glue, carpenter's glue or wood glue, and tile grout. The stuff you probably picked up at the hardware store when you were there buying the XPS foam. Tile grout is a fine-grained cement and is bound to make a mess. Be sure to take that into account. Don't go sprinkling this all over your living room table next to your knitting yarn that the cat then plays with and knocks over the tub of cement down on the floor on top of your office attire that just happened to fall off your hips while you were busy getting hot doing your hobby. You have been warned. I smear on a layer of white glue on a wall section and then sprinkle on tile grout. Move on to the next section and work my way round the house, making sure not to glue any of my exposed foam tile bits. After things have settled, about half an hour later, I gently brush off the worst excess with a large, soft brush. Nothing too overpowering at all, as that will just create a muddy mess, but a gentle brush will shape the grout into a little something more plaster-like. The next day, yes, this will take a while to set, I rub and brush off as much excess as I can. This is preferably done outdoors. And just look at that lovely texture. What a treat. I can now glue in my windows as well as some cornice stones or whatever you call these things. These can be simply crafted by using strips of thick paper, by the way, just a lot more time consuming. If I'd gone down that route, I'd probably have added tile grout texture to them as well. And we could say that the ruin is done. I hope you can stretch your imagination to how this could be many types of ruin or non-ruined house. Thin strips of foam core can be cut as ledges. Chimneys can be made by removing the paper from one side of the foam core of something chimney-shaped to then edging in some bricks. And I know it doesn't look as cool, but I can strongly recommend flat roofs for gameplay purposes. Just a little tip from a non-pro. I am, of course, not done, as I never am. And so what follows is a rapid succession in detail, as well as going back to finalize the hill. There's also the little matter of how to prepare all this for painting. I build the remains of a second floor that's fallen down, handily creating a walkway up towards my lighthouse. I pressed in some cut-in-half matches into the edges of my ruined floors, a representation of some structural beams or something. I mixed white glue and tile grout. This could also be replaced by a texture paste or wall filler. I just used what I had next to me. The paste I used to fill any gaps around the windows, as well as carefully brushing some out here and there on the entire build. This will dry with a texture that looks more wet than the plaster underneath. I thought it might make for a good damp plaster effect in places. Whenever I felt that I was ruining things, I just sprinkled a little dry tile grout on. Once dry, I mixed Mod Podge and black paint. Well, I used a locally cheaper version of Mod Podge and black paint. Mod Podge is a decoupage glue. It creates a sealing layer, like a very thick layer of varnish over everything. 2 reasons for this. Well, 3 actually. 1, to seal in the tile grout properly. 2, it acts as protection against solvents on the foam. Using a rattle can primer or solvent-based paints, or superglue for that matter, melts the foam and so it needs to be sealed. Thirdly, it protects the foam from wear and tear during gaming. The reason for the black paint is to see that one gets this mix everywhere, but it's also handy later on because you'll be sure that there's no weird white spot in a really hard to reach area when painting. With that black paint on, things are looking real nice and coherent. I changed my mind about the basement. I need a ground floor for the minis to move about, so I filled up most of the basement, but created a ramp of sorts. It'll represent a part of the floor that's caved in, revealing the basement underneath. A little weird underwater door that makes perfect sense, as well as a caved out section of the building, gives access to the building from multiple points on multiple levels. I textured the XPS foam with a stone and a ball of aluminium foil. Did the same white glue and tile grout trick, only this time more glue and no brushing afterwards created more of a ground texture than a plaster texture. When dry, I painted on that decoupage and black paint mixture and then glued the building in place. Mind you, a smart person would have done this in tandem while building the house, as there is a lot of waiting for things to dry. We're talking several days. But again, unfortunately, my mind does not work that way. With the building in place, I could build a little connecting stone bridge, a foam core sheet cut to suit. Paper removed on one side and the texture of brick and stone etched in with a ballpoint pen. I actually used rolling pins as a texture guide that I then enhanced with the pen. The building itself needs to look like it's part of the scenery built on a rocky shoreline. I used rock molds and some pieces of cork bark to create the effect, gluing it up over the foundations of the building. Now on both the hill and the foundations of the house, we've got these glued on elements that don't quite line up with the surface underneath, resulting in gaps that need to be filled. For this, I'm going to use modeling compound from Geek Gaming Scenics. I'm not exactly sure what's in it, but it looks like and acts like plaster with shredded paper in it. It solidifies very fast, so small batches are preferred. This compound kind of shapes itself very randomly and is an efficient way to fill up gaps in something that is meant to resemble naturalistic surfaces. I use this not only to fill gaps in rock molds, but also the gaps between the XPS sheet layers on the hill. Other products can of course be used, I just think this one is rather handy. Whatever dries too fast on me, I discard in the building for safekeeping. It's not going to stick there, but we can use it later as rubble. Once dry, and that's another long wait, the modeling compound looks like it's doing a decent job at blending the foam and the molds and the cork bark into solid-looking rock. It's now time for rubble. I'm going for the brick kind of rubble. Reasonably, all the missing walls of the ruin would now be in piles of stone or bricks littering the floor. They might even be big piles that handily turn into an access point to the first floor. If you did get XPS foam to build a hill and you do have a foam cutter, making strips of foam to then cut into bricks is no problem. Once cut, texturing them is a nice daily stress-relieving ritual. You can also put them in a container with some rocks and give it a good shake. We've also got lots of leftover bits of foam core. Removing all the paper and we've got very suitable foam. Again, cut to brick size and then textured. There's all that leftover dry bits of modeling compound we saved. Makes for nice random bits of rubble and mortar. Broken bits of matches. This is not really matches, but it's the wood bit without the flaming bit. I bought a bag of this stuff at some point and have yet to run out. Any bits of wood like broken up coffee stirrers or ice cream sticks will do. Finally, a little sprinkle of modeling ground cover. I think this one is mainly tea leaves or something. You can pretty much add whatever rubble-like stuff you've got, old bits of sprue or whatever. Again, some of that black decoupage glue mix. This will protect the foam. It would also make sure that there's not an annoying white mass of the bottom of a big pile of bricks that you just can't get paint onto. And it will make the placing of this rather light and fluffy brick mixture easier. It won't make the bricks stick permanently, but enough to keep working. Oh, and I added some of the leftover broken window bits. Any high detail bits, like bits from plastic kits or 3D prints, is great. It just makes everything look very realistic. Some broken furniture here and there would of course have been great, and maybe I'll have to look into that later on down the road. The next day I give the bricks a bit of a poke. They would all come off with a bit of force, but they're stuck enough in place to finish off the job. This is the last rubble and dust, using homegrown sand, purchased sand, a variety of different rocks, of rubble, sand and dust. I guess the only important thing is to have a variety in size, and that the surface this is put on is absolutely dry. The thing is, if one, say, adds a bit of glue and then throws some sand on, it doesn't really land naturally. Most of it turns into like unnatural sand puddles. I might also get glue on the bricks, making the fine-grained rubble stick to the top and sides of the bricks, whereas naturally it would be on the floor under the bricks. It would gather up in corners along walls, not on walls, and maybe be blown off from exposed surfaces. And so by adding different size sand and dirt like this, then moving it about with a brush, shaping the scene, so to speak, the effect just becomes so much more natural and realistic compared to what would happen if we tried to add glue first and then stick sand to it. But how do we get this to stick? Well, my answer is so-called sealant, again from Geek Gaming Scenics. Again, I don't know what this is made out of, but I don't think you could go wrong by just mixing some of the decoupage glue with some airbrush flow improver. But I'm using this as a fail-proof example for those of you that don't feel like experimenting too much. and we just spray it on. And I mean a lot. And I mean to let it dry and then repeat. Even after 2 layers of this, there might be some sand that comes off, but most likely it's the stuff that's been hiding in a corner or something hard to reach. A vacuum cleaner will be the ultimate reaper. And there we have it. The lost souls of the non-rehabilitated weird World War I magic-y miniatures have a home and a hill for their lighthouse. The ruin and hill is accessible from several sides, offers several levels of playability, and to my eye looks great for, in theory, just half a sheet of foam core and some XPS foam. I'm not going to paint this right now because I haven't figured out the overall scheme for the table. But for your pleasure, I primed the building black. I used an airbrush because there is too much exposed foam all around, but there is in theory no worry to prime the build itself with a rattle can, because of all of that diligent sealing with decoupage glue. Then I dusted the black with a white just to bring out the details. I've not added stone or rubble to the hill. I'd recommend that you do, something I will do when the rest of this half of the board is ready for it. But you can imagine what that hill might look like with a bit of the same treatment as the house got at the end. I hope you like the look of this and that it might inspire you to do some crafting of your own for the tabletop. Even the simplest terrain makes for fun games, and a lot of fun can be had creating your own terrain. Most of this basic crafting is kid-friendly as well, so a great opportunity to do something with your spawn or related spawn. Remember to ask before you borrow someone else's kids though, another pro tip. Thanks for watching. Please take a moment to check out my Patreon, or the Patreon of another creator. It's the best way to keep us going. A great thank you to all that do support through Patreon. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.